Something happened at the NATO Summit in Turkey that the American media does not want its audience to fully understand. Mark Carney walked into a room full of the world's most powerful military leaders, leaders who have spent decades expecting one country to carry the heaviest burden inside the Western alliance. Leaders who built their entire defense planning around the assumption that when NATO needed someone to step forward, America would always be first. And Carney stood in front of all of them and announced that Canada is done waiting in the wings. Not done with NATO, not done with the alliance, done waiting for someone else to lead. Because the world those leaders built their assumptions around no longer exists. The threats have changed, the burdens have shifted, and the country that was supposed to carry the heaviest load has spent the past 2 years attacking the very allies it was supposed to protect. Into that vacuum stepped a Canadian Prime Minister with submarines being commissioned, fighter jets being acquired, drone partnerships being built with Ukraine, defense spending on its fastest upward trajectory since the Cold War, and a vision for Canada's military future that is frankly more ambitious than anything Ottawa has announced in living memory. This was not a press conference. This was a declaration, and tonight Canada Line is breaking down every word of it. Subscribe right now because what Carney said in Turkey will shape Canadian security for the next 30 years. To understand why today's remarks were so significant, you need to understand what is actually happening inside NATO right now. For decades, the alliance operated on a simple and largely unspoken arrangement. America provided the overwhelming majority of military capability, intelligence infrastructure, and strategic leadership. European and Canadian members contributed meaningfully, but never had to carry the full weight because Washington was always there as the ultimate guarantor. Trump shattered that arrangement, not accidentally, deliberately, by questioning whether NATO was worth America's investment, by threatening to abandon allies who did not meet spending targets, by treating the alliance as a transactional arrangement rather than a foundational commitment built on shared values and mutual security. The result is that every NATO member is now being asked a question nobody had to seriously answer for 70 years. What happens if America steps back further? Who fills that space? And is your country ready to do more? Carney's answer in Turkey was unambiguous. Canada is ready.
Big picture, the threats are changing rapidly. The threats that face Canada, the threats that face the alliance, evolution of the technical threats, if I can put it that way, from hypersonic missiles to autonomous warfare, hybrid warfare, the adversaries, Russia as a direct adversary. So that evolution is there. There's a process of shifting burdens. We've known about that, shifting burdens towards within the alliance, away from the United States. United States still in the alliance without question, but shifting towards Europe and Canada, and those burdens being picked up. And the capacities are being built, and you've seen recent announcements. There's more announcements today from Canada in terms of our procurement, building capacity across maritime capacity with the sub announcement, light vehicles, munitions, the aircraft announcement, which we've now seen endorsed by NATO.
Listen to what Carney just enumerated there. Submarines, aircraft now endorsed by NATO itself through the Global Eye program. Light vehicles, munitions, maritime capacity being built at a scale Canada has not attempted in decades. This is not a politician making promises about future spending. This is a prime minister listing things that are already decided, already contracted, already in motion. And the geopolitical framing around those announcements is just as important as the hardware itself, because Carney explicitly named Russia as a direct adversary of the alliance. He named hypersonic missiles and autonomous warfare as the evolving threat landscape. He named the Arctic as a strategic priority. These are not abstract security concepts. They are specific threats that Canada is specifically preparing to confront with specific capabilities being built right now. That level of clarity and specificity from a Canadian Prime Minister at a NATO summit is genuinely historic, and it lands in Washington like a message wrapped inside a military announcement. Canada is not asking for American protection anymore. Canada is building its own. But Carney did not stop at capability announcements. He addressed the question that every NATO ally is wrestling with right now, directly and without flinching. Who is going to pay for this new era of collective defense? When Carney took office, Canada was spending 1.4% of GDP on defense, below the NATO target, below what Canada had committed to, below what the alliance's most vulnerable members were sacrificing to meet their obligations. That changes now. Carney got Canada to 2% within his first year in office. The first time Canada has hit that target since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and he announced it is scaling to 2.5% over the next 4 years. Combined with an additional 1.5% of GDP on resilient spending, Canada is on track to be spending 4% of its economy on defense and security before the end of this decade. That number matters, because it means Canada is not just meeting NATO expectations. Canada is preparing to exceed them by a margin that will make it one of the alliance's most serious defense investors.
We were spending 1.4% of GDP on defense, direct defense expenditure. We got that to 2% in the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's going to scale up to 2.5% over the fiscal framework over the course of the next 4 years. And in addition, we're spending 1.5% of GDP around resilience. So by the NATO definition, before the end of this decade, we are spending 4%.
1.4% when he arrived, 2% already achieved, 2.5% within 4 years, 4% total before 2030. That trajectory is not incremental improvement. That is a fundamental transformation of how seriously Canada takes its own defense. And Carney added something that separates serious defense investment from political theater. The money for the submarines is already provisioned, already set aside in the fiscal framework. The announcement will not blow up the budget because the budget was built around it. That level of fiscal discipline in a defense announcement is almost unheard of in modern Canadian politics. Usually, major procurement decisions come with promises about future budgets that never quite materialize. Carney announced submarines and immediately told the bond market and Canadian taxpayers exactly where the money is coming from. That is the difference between a politician making a headline and a former central banker building a defense capability. And every NATO ally in that room understood the difference immediately. But perhaps the most strategically fascinating part of Carney's remarks came when he described what Canada is building with Ukraine. Because this is where Canada's defense strategy gets genuinely creative in a way no other NATO member has articulated as clearly. Ukraine has spent 3 years developing the most advanced battlefield drone technology in the world under actual combat conditions. They have production capabilities, they have expertise, they have innovations in autonomous warfare that NATO's traditional defense contractors are only beginning to understand. And Carney announced Canada is partnering directly with Ukrainian firms. Canadian companies and Ukrainian companies building defense technology together, creating integrated supply chains that span from Kyiv to Canadian manufacturing facilities to potentially Nordic partners. The logic is brilliant. Canada gets access to battle-tested technology. Ukraine gets economic support and industrial partnership. NATO gets a stronger integrated supply chain. And everyone gets a cheaper and faster path to autonomous warfare capability than buying exclusively from established American defense giants.
Ukraine has made tremendous advances in drones and autonomous warfare in the integration of those capabilities. That is relevant for everybody. Okay. They have expertise, they have production capabilities, and we are in the process, Canada included, of partnering with Ukrainian firms, Canadian firms and Ukrainian firms partnering and building up that capacity. Now, that in and of itself creates a supply chain. I've got a firm in Ukraine, maybe several firms in Ukraine, a firm in Canada, maybe somebody in the Nordics as well, and the ability to finance across that supply chain cost effectively is tremendously valuable. It lowers the cost of it for everybody. Us partnering with Ukraine not just brings technology, but it's cheaper even in a war theater to produce many things in Ukraine because of just volumes and other factors. That also saves money for Canadian taxpayers. And what it does as well, and maybe I should end on this since we're at the NATO Summit, it also pulls, tightens the alliance. It's another mechanism that builds the alliance together. And I think if I can just make one adjacent point, and this goes to taxpayers, what we don't want to do is we all build up is to all build up in silos.
No silos. That phrase captures exactly what separates Carney's vision of NATO's future from the way most defense spending has historically worked. Every country buying its own equipment, every country building its own capabilities, every country spending more than necessary because nobody is sharing infrastructure, supply chains, or technological development. Carney is arguing for something fundamentally different, an integrated alliance where Canadian firms and Ukrainian firms and Nordic firms are building the same drone technology together, where financing flows efficiently across borders, where the whole is dramatically more capable than the sum of its parts. That is not just a defense strategy. That is an economic argument. And coming from the former governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, it carries the credibility of someone who actually understands how supply chains and financing structures work at a global scale. Trump tried to make NATO a transaction. Carney is trying to make it a genuine alliance again, built on shared technology, shared investment, and shared capability rather than one country's dominance and everyone else's dependency. Step back from all the specific numbers and announcements for a moment, because there is something larger happening in Turkey today that history books may eventually record as a turning point. For the first time in decades, a Canadian Prime Minister walked into a NATO summit not as a country asking for credit while underspending on defense, not as an ally hoping nobody notices the gap between commitments and contributions, not as a junior partner waiting for Washington to set the agenda, but as a country that has submarines in the pipeline, fighter jets endorsed by NATO, drone partnerships with Ukraine, defense spending on the fastest upward trajectory since the Berlin Wall fell, a $500 billion defense industrial strategy creating 125,000 jobs, and a prime minister with the economic credibility to explain exactly how all of it is being paid for without breaking the budget. Trump spent 2 years trying to make Canada feel small, dependent, militarily irrelevant, a country that needed American protection to survive. Today in Turkey, the world's most powerful military alliance watched Canada's Prime Minister lay out a vision that makes that characterization look not just wrong, but almost comically disconnected from reality. Canada is not asking for protection anymore. Canada is becoming one of the protectors. Subscribe to Canada Line for deep, honest analysis of how Canada is reshaping its place in the world. Turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next one.